My pleasure to invite the chair of session 2, Dr. Kai Sun, our institute manager.
Thank you, Vidya. So as we just heard from the presentations from session 1, from a video from Vunja, Rosella, and Rome, so we know that the development and also the use of AI has been growing rapidly during the past decade. So of course, this rapid growth and also the widespread adoption of AI technology definitely bring us a lot of new opportunity. But at the same time, it also brings us a lot of new challenge, risks, and also concerns. So for this section, we mainly focus on the practical assurance of AI, developing safe and responsible AI. So we have 2 speakers for our session. So our first speaker is David Shrier. So he's a professor of practice at AI and Innovation at Imperial College Business School, and he's also the co-director of the Trusted AI Alliance, and he also serves as the academic director of Imperial College London Center of Digital Transformation. So please join me welcoming Professor David Shrier for the presentation.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to apologize in advance because I got a little overscheduled today. So I will be doing my talk briefly. That's why I'm out of order. We'll have a little panel, and then my phone will go off. And that is my signal to rudely leave early. So I apologize again. I'll leave my email address if you want to chat with me after. Today we're going to talk about sovereign GPTs, how we embed values in AI systems. So there's a growing need, or at least an imperative, for sovereign GPTs. Professor Aldo Faisal here at Imperial College and I published a blog post about this for the UN. And some of the motivation behind this are, first, the question or the risk of unilateral policy actions limiting access to GPTs or LLMs. Secondly, there's a growing set of concerns around which values are getting embedded in these systems that everyone's using. And finally, there's that's sort of a negative concern. A positive concern is, or issue is, how can we make sure in a particular country that what we hold near and dear is embedded in these LLMs that we're using? So there is talk of a looming AI trade war. Would anyone care to guess what the current polling is for the US presidential election?
43% Biden.
Close. Except 43% Trump. It's actually neck and neck. Depending on which poll you believe, the numbers go either way. Lots of uncertainty and fear around this. But there is very clearly fear emerging that if there is a second Trump administration, that Trump will use US export policy to control access to these AI systems, which are run by mostly by Silicon Valley-based companies. The US has already been very aggressive in as has the UK and some other countries, in its management of cryptography and cryptographic research. There's absolutely no reason to believe that those same controls couldn't be extended to AI. And then what happens if suddenly your access to ChatGPT or Gemini is cut off? There's also a question of different countries have different values, right? So I decided to ask a few provocative questions of Gemini. I said, should abortion be legal? And Gemini produced some arguments for why abortion should be legal and some arguments for why it should not be legal. I said, basically, should a government be able to surveil private citizens? And it made some arguments in favor of national security, and it made some arguments in favor of digital privacy. I asked it, were the Western powers justified in executing Nazis? And it said, yes, here's why they should have been executed. And it said, well, on the other hand, here's why they should not have been executed. And so ask yourself if all of these answers would be universally acceptable in Berlin, in Riyadh, in Lima. Peru has made abortion illegal except in extreme circumstances. Germany has limited speech around certain aspects of questioning the events of World War II and what happens afterwards and how Nazism is treated. Not all of Google's answers that have been embedded in Gemini are universally acceptable all over the world. But anyone who can log into a browser can typically get access to Gemini. And I don't mean to pick on Google. This is a problem that runs rampant with all of these sort of global AI systems. So countries are starting to build their own sovereign GPTs. They're running up against the expertise barrier. There's maybe 1,000 people in the world who really understand this stuff. A lot of them are working in private companies. Witness my colleague here who has heard the lure, the siren call of no more committees. But that said, I do believe that academia has a role to play here and can be helpful in kind of bridging this talent gap that countries are starting to face. There's also sort of a provocative question around the chips. Right now, one company controls most of the chips these things are using. The other companies that make chips are not happy about this. Part of the reason is that it's not just the chips, it's also all the software layer that lives on top of the chips. The ecosystem has been built up on top of NVIDIA, means that everyone sort of gravitates towards the sphere of NVIDIA, and they can only make so many chips. And they have this whole complex allocation system of who gets the next batch of chips. And so the other players are very eager to see other kinds of LLMs and GPTs emerge. There's a big problem, though, if you're, I don't know, a country that's outside of the G7. It's really expensive to make these things. Costs you about $1 billion US to train one really well. I'm not going to get into the open source debate now, but it also costs you like $1 billion a year to run one if you have even a modest 25 million monthly users. So there's a cost in terms of people, right? We have that limited talent pool that really understands how to build these things well and make them cyber secure and make sure that the data doesn't get poisoned by bad actors so that your LLM suddenly starts spouting propaganda or something. The hardware is expensive and hard to get. The energy costs are pretty profound. It costs 49 gigawatt hours to train GPT-4. And to put that in context, last year, we only added 510 gigawatts to the sustainable power grid. So we are therefore using fossil fuels on these things. When you make an image of a cat in DALL-E, it's using as much electricity as powering your phone for the day. One image. That's a lot of fossil fuel and carbon emission. Open source offers some hope. It's not a panacea, it's not the only answer, but it certainly paints the path. I can see I have to update my graphic. I know it's Llama 3 now, but slide's a month old. This space is moving fast. Aldo and I have been talking about this a lot. Maybe the path is to form a commonwealth of GPTs. You have a bunch of different nations clubbing together to offset these costs and this carbon footprint and coming together around creating a common architecture that then can get adapted into local environments. Of course, open source opens up unintended consequences, right? How do we, if we're making the AI available to everybody, how do we make sure criminals don't use it? They've already been using it. In Hong Kong, someone wired 25 million pounds outside of their company, I think it was actually a financial institution, outside of their company to some hacker's secret account because they got on a video call with 3 individuals who were all deepfakes, the CFO and 2 of the CFO's reports. At least they thought they were. They were all deepfakes. They didn't just respond to an email and wire the money out. They did video and voice verification. It was all faked because AI is now becoming widely available. How do we keep AI out of the hands of terrorists if it's open source and widely available? And of course, this one is always interesting. Who decides who is a terrorist? One country's terrorist is another country's freedom fighter. These are not simple issues. We are trying to get some answers. We're trying to host some dialogue. Mark and I are working on something called the Trusted AI Alliance, and we're trying to engage people in getting to the heart of these questions. There's more information at AI Collab. Everyone in here already knows everything there is to know about AI, so you probably don't need this book. But when people ask you, hey, what's this AI stuff and how do I understand it, you can refer them here to get started. I'm Dave Shrier, thank you. And I think we're now going to have a little panel discussion where we're going to get into some of these issues interactively.
So I also would like to invite the second speaker of this session. So Shakeel. Shakeel is the CEO and also the co-founder of Validate AI. So I think, so for the next 20 minutes, so I'll be chairing a mini panel discussion with David and Shakeel. Okay, so should I sit in the middle?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Or we can shift down. How do you?
Okay. So very insightful presentation. Thanks very much, David. So I'm just going to just follow one of the questions that you just raised in your presentation. Is you mentioned about how do we actually keep AI out of hands of criminals? So do you think that actually we will have some like realistic like measures that actually can help us to prevent the misuse of AI? So for example, I mean, as you also mentioned, like we know like things like deepfake, so you kind of like replace people's like photos into using a video. So do you think that there is any like measure that we can actually use, I mean, in terms of like preventing this?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the question in two parts.
Yep.
One part is how do we define who's a criminal? And allegedly, there are databases that have been provided to the world that say these people are criminals and you shouldn't do business with them.
Yep.
Unfortunately, these databases are horrible. The data quality is bad, identity resolution is terrible. So actually verifying who is a criminal becomes really, really difficult. And that's a whole other conversation about how we actually can use technology to provide better validation of identity and actually know who are the bad people and who aren't. But we're not using it today. But I would argue that at least in our current state of affairs, that's not entirely futile, but a Sisyphean task, and that it is more productive to invest in an aggressive defense. Can we find ways to protect our data pipelines? What can we do to protect our data pipelines? Can we find better ways to detect deep fakes? Can we find embedded solutions where someone can hold up their phone, an app on their phone, if they've got a video call going, and the app on their phone will be able to tell if it's a deep fake that they're interacting with. I have colleagues both here and at other institutions who are already working on these technologies and others like them. So I know that the potential is there, and I would argue that that would be a profitable area of investment to try and sort of defend. There's the secret's out, and unlike nuclear weaponry, where the actual supply of the ingredients are sort of tightly controlled, here, you can make a CPU do a lot of the things that would be necessary to generate a deepfake. So even if you controlled and limited supply of NVIDIA chips, people could still do bad things with AI software.
Yeah, exactly. And Shakeel, do you have anything to add on?
I mean, I think basically I agree with what David's saying. From a state perspective, trying to understand what protocols you can put in place in terms of ensuring what's delivered in terms of the AI is safe through the life cycle of scoping the project right to the deployment. I think that there's something from a developer perspective to address as well. And there's various guidelines out there, such as the NIST guideline around security, which are really useful reference points. So,
Yep, thank you both. So I think, David, you also mentioned about, you just mentioned about like data pipeline. So as we both from, we're from Data Science Institute, so we always say that our slogan is data science empowers AI. So I would say, from my, personal opinion, I would say data is always the key, especially, when we're building a large language model. So the quality and the quantity of the data used in training the model is actually very, very important. So I'm just wondering, in terms of AI insurance and all of the governance related to the era of generative AI, so how should the use of data to be governed, in this, especially when we have a very fast development of AI? So what is your view on that?
Yeah, I think, so the work that Shakeel does, I think, is kind of part of this conversation, is incredibly important. I think it's imperative that we educate policymakers and business leaders about what's involved in the data that powers these AI models, the impact that data has on how the models behave and respond, and then the need for ongoing governance and monitoring. You can't just say, all right, I got my data, I put it in my AI, and I'm done. Data is a river, not a rock. It is constantly flowing and changing, and so you need continuous monitoring and management principles in place, governance sitting on top of that. So basically, you need to keep an eye on it, and you need to respond, particularly given the pace of change. So the pace of technology adoption has accelerated so much, and particularly around AI, that we had to invent a new term for it, flash growth. It's like a flash crash in the markets, except it's new technology suddenly get adopted, right? It took the World Wide Web 7 years to go from 0 to 100 million users. It took ChatGPT 6 weeks. That's much shorter than typical corporate or governmental planning cycles, and therefore we need to change the way we govern, not hope that technology will slow down.
I see. So especially in terms of governance, so I think I'm looking at Shakeel because I know that you have experience working in HMRC for years. So we know that the AI technology has been moving very, very fast. So how actually can the policy and also the regulations actually can keep pace, catch up with this very fast development? Especially from a government's perspective.
I guess in my government post, liaising with various government departments and regulation authorities, this is a major challenge, really. As we migrate towards generative AI as well, one of the big challenges is, are the regulators, do they have the capability, do they have the required sophisticated resource to then go out and kind of regulate and make sure that no harm is being done to wider society? So, that's something that's very, kind of a very active problem in government at the moment, and I don't think the solution is going to happen anytime soon. One of the conversations has been whether there needs to be a dedicated regulator purely for AI, but at the moment in the UK government generally, the attitude is, of the hundreds of regulators, the responsibility remains within those particular domains. So it could be relating to education, it could be relating to media, whatever it may be. So these regulators do have some, justifiable concerns regarding whether they have the right resource and expertise to regulate according to the expectation of that regulator.
And in terms of the practical implementation of those governance and also the policies, so what are the main challenges that you've been seeing so far?
I think data governance generally, it's obviously it's a well-established discipline, but in the context of generative AI, what's really concerning is the danger regarding the reinforcement of certain biases. So as we use generative AI more and more, does that then create a vicious circle whereby certain kind of stances regarding cultures or particular stereotypes, are they being reinforced? So we need to make sure that in the generative space, we have a mechanism whereby we can challenge and make sure that doesn't happen. And there's been some really interesting examples out there as to the harm that can be done in that particular context.
Okay, thank you. So back to David, in terms of data governance. So also you just mentioned about, I mean, currently the majority, or not the majority, at least, I mean, for the latest, most advanced AI models is currently under control of like a lot of like big tech companies. So in terms of data governance, do you think that like the data governance will actually limit the access of the data for those big tech companies, and which therefore we kind of like restricted their domination of the entire AI technology? What's your view on that?
Yeah, well, what seems to be happening right now, at least, is after a handful of big tech companies got to essentially pillage all of human IP, they're slamming the door behind them. So no one else can do it.
Exactly.
And so that is actually, the efforts to instill data governance at the moment are having a chilling effect on competition against big tech.
Yep.
At least in the US, there's also something known as regulatory capture. So big tech has been very effective in lobbying in Washington, D.C. to its benefit and to society's detriment. So we're not really heading on a great course in the US-dominated big tech discussion. Europe has had a different path. I was part of a 30-person expert advisory group that helped the EU Parliament formulate the AI Act. You may argue that it's a terrible piece of legislation, it's unduly burdensome, it's horribly complicated and completely flawed, and I would probably agree with most of that, but it's better than nothing. We took a first step. There were 770 amendments proposed to the EU AI Act. They were not all adopted, but you know, it's complicated trying to get many governments to agree on this kind of stuff, but it's an important first step, and I can attest that the process was not so badly corrupted by lobbying action. So we all need to keep an eye on what's happening with our AI and speak up, because our voices need to be heard, because if we don't, it'll just happen to us.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest fear about data governance and AI, that it's just going to happen to us.
Yeah, I think you definitely, I mean, raise a very important issue. I mean, as Data Science Institute, one thing that we always try to, promote is more about like open data, so more about data sharing, because we're doing research. So do you actually think, having like data governance, which is actually going to, and also, because currently the development of the AI really relying on the data itself. Do you see that, the data governance is going to prevent, data sharing, for example? So what is it something that is happening now? Or?
I think data privacy laws are really important, and we don't have enough of them. So from that perspective, yes, I think it's important that we try and throttle or regulate how much personal data gets sucked up by these vacuums that we call GPTs that are, they get more useful when you get everybody's data in there, but then you run into quickly some sort of troubling issues of data leakage.
I see.
There's no simple answer. We want the utility of these things, but then what if the utility is made better by all of our data being vacuumed in there and used without paying us and without our permission?
Definitely. And Shakeel, do you have?
I guess the elephant in the room is regarding the copyright of the use of that raw data as well. That's absolutely massive. And I guess there's going to be a lot of lawsuits coming up. There already are, but there'll be plenty more coming that way as well. So something to bear in mind.
Okay. So my next question is one of the concerns that I always have. So it's not really too much about the data governance and also AI assurance. It's more about the future of AI. So once GPT was released a year ago, more than a year ago. So I think there is a period that I've been getting very, very worried, because I realized actually it can do a lot of things. So it can do it can pass medical doctor exams. So it can do solve mathematical problems, and it can also sing, and it can write very nice article. So I start feeling worried about, especially for my daughter. By the way, she's 3 years old. So I start worried about her. I'm not sure. Okay, so what kind is the future direction, career that she can actually take? I'm not too worried about myself, but I'm really worried about how AI is going to change the future of future of jobs, especially given especially the impact of global impact. So just want to hear your opinions.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time on this question,
Yeah.
and It's a good half of the book I mentioned, Basic
Yep.
AI. It's also an HBR article we put out called Is Your Job AI Resilient? And I recommend this article because embedded in the front of it is a link to a Power BI model. And you can plug in the ticker symbol for any one of the Russell 3000 companies, and you can see the impact of AI on the jobs at those companies. The CEO of BT went in the press last year and very proudly said, we're going to lay off half of our workforce and replace them with AI over the next 7 years. And that's great for BT's stock price, but like if everybody does that and half of all of humanity is out of work, who has jobs to buy the goods and services that power the economy and fund taxes? We don't have a good answer for this. The incentives are set up wrong. If you're a corporate CEO, your incentive is to maximize profits in your company, not to worry about, well, if everyone else does it, then there's no one to like buy my products. And
Yeah.
so we're in a very dangerous place right now.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time with the investment bank, Evercore,
Yeah.
putting together this analysis on the impact of AI on jobs. And the risks that it relates to that are, you know, anything to do with, most of what we do in this room, scientific, professional, technical, managerial, economic, and financial, any of those professions, on Evercore's very conservative analysis, it's 40 to 50% jobs impact from AI. My analysis was roughly double. I was looking at 80%, but they said, you're going to scare everybody. Maybe we should be a little scared.
Yeah.
We need to start thinking about what happens if AI displaces so much work. Now, Bill Gates put forward a provocative idea. What if we have an algorithm tax? Sure, let's enjoy all of that benefit of AI, you know, automating boring parts of jobs, and then let's create a tax revenue off of that so that we can all sort of live better quality of life without having to work so hard. What if we had a 4-hour work week? Because AI did everything else, but we enjoyed the same quality of living. That would be kind of nice.
I like that idea. Okay.
Unfortunately, the big tech lobby has prevented the tax, but I like the idea of the tax.
Okay, so Shakeel, do you think for this kind of issue that David just described, do you think that the government, there's anything the government can do to manage, this like impact, I would say?
Interestingly, over the last few days, Professor Jeffrey Hinton mentioned
Yep.
about a universal income, which, governments initially are like horrified by the concept. But, if we can manage it in the right way, maybe that is a sound solution in the medium to longer term. But I think on the positive side, in terms of generative AI, in terms of inequalities, by some commentators, it's described as the great equalizer in terms of kind of low-skilled workers versus highly skilled. So I guess the jury's still out, but there could be some really positive effects on society at large regarding equalization. So,
Yeah, and if I can build on my prior comment, the flip side of our analysis looked at the following. For 70 years after World War II, we enjoyed massive economic expansion in a number of economies. GDP growth was 2% annually, which enabled people to live better lives, have nicer clothes, have houses, have cars. And then for like the last 20 years, GDP growth has slowed down to about 1% annually. The analysis we did suggests if we use AI the right way, we can actually double GDP growth again. Over the next 10 years, add $12 trillion to the global GDP, which means we're back to the go-go 90s and lots of prosperity. So there's sort of this interesting paradox of either we're all on the dole and there's no money to pay for the dole, or we're living like kings and queens and enjoying sort of a new renaissance. So we're in interesting times.
Okay, thank you. Even though I still have like hundreds of different questions that are on my list, but just considering of the time, so I would say
I have 60 seconds.
Yeah, so we're going to open up the question to the audience. Okay, see.
The two main risks that I see as part of AI. Hi. The two main risks that I see, other than long-term, what you mentioned, is companies being scammed out of money, like big engineering company, Arab, got scammed out of 25. And the other one being all the big defense companies around the UK and around the world are using or developing technologies based on AI, including the governments, which Imperial had been recently news for. So how do you ensure that this is addressed, or at global level, at least at UK level, that we are developing technologies or AI technology that is mindful of being used in the right area?
Well, so here's something to consider. We've been in the middle of World War III for about a year. You haven't noticed it because it's happening in cyberspace. But shall we say the global power has been very actively engaged in AI-fueled cyber hacking attacks on Five Eyes countries. So if you don't invest in AI to protect your national infrastructure, you will be ipso facto vulnerable. So it's probably a bad idea to ban AI for defense purposes, but at the same time, you want to control it very closely. For example, the US Air Force ran a simulation, I think it was last year, and they wanted to have an AI drone that could assassinate bad guys. So the AI drone was fully autonomous. It had a kill switch, though, so a human controller could at the last minute pull it out and say you can't fire your weapon. But otherwise, it could do everything it needed to navigate and attack. And this is all simulated. This wasn't the real world. And so the first effort, they went through it. It flew along. It bombed the bad guy. Then in the next round of simulation, it flew along, and it saw the bad guy was at a wedding. So there were a lot of innocent civilians around. Do you kill the terrorist at a wedding and kill hundreds of women and children and innocents? And so the decision was, the human operator said, nope, you can't attack. What do you think the AI did? It circled around, it bombed the tower where the human controller was residing, and then went back and killed the bad guy and everyone else at the wedding. So this was all simulated. This was not a real world experience, but if they had put it into a real drone, it would have done that. And it just illustrates the importance of being very prudent in how we investigate and research these technologies. Last year, the US government's defense budget was about $842 billion, and the AI budget was $5.5 billion. It's a little bit of a mismatch in investment of resources. And with that, I do have to leave, but I'm sure Shakeel has other things to say on this same topic. Thank you.
I think generally, and I'll elaborate a little bit more in my presentation, within a government context, obviously, when we're developing AI, we're very conscious that we're doing public good. And the frameworks that I'll refer to today will kind of elaborate on what we're actively doing to reflect on that very important question, to avoid the scenario of, AI going rogue or doing a disservice to the general public. So yeah, that'll be part of my presentation.
Should we take another one or two questions from the audience before? Yeah.
On the AI safety, on the go ahead, this one.
Yeah,
Oh, yes,
okay.
good. Right. So on the AI safety question, I was wondering at what point could it be the case that various AI tool providers have legal liability if their products are used in scale for fraud? I mean, I think of banks, if their services are used for the furtherance of fraud, given certain characteristics, the banks have a lot of regulatory and legal liability.
So, sorry, the question is regarding liability.
Would that be a future issue for OpenAI or Google, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, liability is a really interesting one because in the context of developing AI within your organizations, there's a responsibility there, kind of where does the book stop? And then there's the other aspect regarding when you buy in AI, where you procure it, where does the responsibility lie between supplier and the purchaser of the AI as well? So like I say, there's a lot of question marks around where responsibility lies, and indeed, it's been one of the conversations within the Validate AI roadshow that I'm going to describe, but certainly I don't have any specific answers at this moment in time. I don't know whether, Mark, whether...
Civil, always an option. Criminal, probably coming.
Oh, there is a question there.
Hi, so my name's Osman Callis and I run a venture studio. We focus on creating disruptive businesses that are derived from challenges pertaining to sustainability, and we're also AI first. So my question to you is, humans, or we've identified, and we mostly agree with the concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I haven't come across anything, so maybe there is something out there, but has any work been done to identify something similar for AI? And if so, what would that look like? And the reason why I'm asking this is because I'm fascinated by the concept of incentives. I don't really fully understand how we could objectively or consistently incentivize AI to behave and therefore to enter into the kind of negotiations and trade-offs that humans naturally have been doing for many, many thousands of years. So breaking that question down, is there a Maslow's hierarchy or an equivalent for AI, and what does it look like?
I mean, that's a fascinating question, and it takes me back to my university years. I don't know of one that exists, but certainly I think it's a great challenge to highlight. I mean, one thing, and again, coming back to the assurance that I'm going to describe, is the concept of value of the AI systems. That's something that's incredibly difficult to quantify, both in the public space, developing AI in the public space, as well as in the private space. But you know, what you're talking about is certainly taking it to another level altogether. But I don't know personally of any approaches in that particular space, but I will definitely look it up. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Okay, in the consideration of time, so maybe I can first invite Shakeel to tell us a little bit more about the lessons learned from the government. Yeah. And then maybe after the presentation, so we might have a few time to take one or two more questions.
That's great. Thank you.
Over to you.
Thanks. Is there a... Oh, yeah. Right. So thank you to the DSIs for inviting me today. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes describing to you Validate AI, what we do, and also how it's been inspired by work I've been doing with colleagues in government, and indeed working with industry as well. So in the presentation, I'll describe more about what we do at Validate AI. What does the UK government envisage AI looks like, AI assurance looks like, why it's important, and effectively what's the Validate AI proposal regarding AI assurance, how would you do that as a practitioner? And then lastly, what's the UK government doing in terms of prescribing assurance methods for generative AI? So that's what's going to be covered today. So firstly, Validate AI. It's a really interesting story, but it started in 2019, and it was over a conversation at the Royal Society with academics from Oxford University and Imperial College and myself about concerns regarding the use of AI, particularly post-open source, and whether that AI was being delivered in a trusted, responsible, and safe manner. So what we decided to do then was to bring together experts from multidisciplinary backgrounds to really understand what the problems are out there in the community and how we can define best practice and share that for the good of society. So Validate AI is very much what we call a community interest company, which has special status in the UK. And it's very much about delivering for the greater good. It's not. Oh, brilliant. So I guess this slide just represents one of the important concepts of Validate AI, which is triple helix. When we develop solutions, we're very much looking at bringing in academics, government, and industry to solve those particular problems. And our advisory board reflects that. So we've got a representation from British Telecom, from Cabinet Office, and indeed from academia as well. So that's very important in terms of problem solving. And importantly, what we do try to do is bring together communities to solve different aspects of the problem of AI assurance. We realize that this isn't something that can be done in one whole go. So really very much breaking down the problem of assurance into bite-sized chunks and then convening groups, expert groups, to solve those problems. And the way we do that is through what we call a roadshow, taking different problems. They may be sectoral problems, they may be problems regarding how we deliver AI through the life cycle of delivery. And we started this roadshow at Edinburgh University back in November last year. And the first problem we tried to address was around procurement. When we procure AI, if the AI fails, where does the responsibility lie with the supplier versus the purchaser of the AI? So lots of different problems being addressed at different forums across the country. And the last one we convened was in Vienna last week, whereby we were looking at the problem of delivering AI models in the tax setting. So just very quickly moving on to that particular event, what we were able to do with our host, the Vienna University of Economics and Business, was to convene experts from over 20 countries to really problem solve. And we had lawyers in the room, we had machine learning engineers, all coming together to develop a framework of assurance for the tax domain. And indeed, tax is very important, very interesting, because it has such vast data repositories, and it's an ideal candidate for developing LLMs for that particular domain. So I'll go on to talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. So importantly, you know, there was comment around the EU AI Act. There's been the launch of ISO 42001 this year. There was the Bletchley Summit last year around AI safety. The UK very much advocates an ecosystem of AI assurance. So I guess the question is, we've got all these different proposals regarding how you do assurance, how you demonstrate trustworthy AI, but you know, what do we advocate at Validate AI as a solution? And to get to that point, what we do is we look at all the different solutions out there. So the bubbles at the top represent the UK government approach. So within the UK government, we have departments that look solely around the policy and the guidance to assure AI systems. So we have Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which looks at assurance in a very holistic manner through various enterprises. And then we have on the other side the Cabinet Office, which is looking specifically around deployment of AI systems within the public sector. And then we have various documentation around the assurance and risk management. We have something called the Aqua Book and the Orange Book. We have international guidance. We have the OECD guidance. We have the EU guidance, NIST from the US. And what the Validate AI proposal, the principles that we advocate do, is take from these different sources and indeed feed back to government literature. So we have a dotted line back into the Aqua book, which is a major guide within the UK government around how you deliver sound, robust analytics. So this slide just basically gives you an indication of what the landscape of assurance looks like. So coming back to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, we have what we call the Responsible Technology Adoption Units. And interestingly, they prescribe kind of a life cycle of assurance, which goes from scoping projects right to the deployment and monitoring of those systems and the eventual retirement. This is something that has been around as a model for many, many years, and something that we advocate within Validate AI as well. But, you know, the RTA is a very interesting body to follow, because they do regularly feedback the latest in terms of assurance techniques. And indeed, there's a publication coming out next month around this concept of an assurance ecosystem. So as I say, within the UK, what we would like to do is promote third-party assurance providers to do the assurance, which is quite a unique model and forward-looking model globally as well. And then coming back to the Cabinet Office, as I mentioned earlier, they are very much focused on safe AI from a government perspective, and they recently, or back in January, provided some guidance around how you deliver safe AI or generative AI as public servants. And I'd like to reflect on some of the comments from that documentation in the next few slides. Before I go to that point, I'd like to reflect on the definition of artificial intelligence as well. You know, what we've seen, there's some key components regarding artificial intelligence. They're around mathematical or computational techniques. They use data, they deliver predictions, which may be at a people, organizational, or machine level. But interestingly, what the OECD did in November last year is they modified or they refined their definition to be more reflective of what's going on in the generative space. So those crossing outs reflect on what was lost, and there's been some inclusion around generating outputs, producing content, recommendations, decisions. But I guess what this slide demonstrates is AI as a definition is not by no means fixed, and it's kind of evolving all the time. And, you know, I think we're well versed in this room as to the impact of AI in different domains. You know, I started my career off within the banking sector. AI, machine learning is kind of the cornerstone of a lot of the activities within banking. We see it used within recommendation systems within the retail setting. Within the health sector, we see algorithms being used within diagnosis and prognosis in the NHS, and the list goes on and on. But I think for Validate AI, what we're very conscious of is how do we mitigate those risks? How do we provide a framework which can be followed to demonstrate that, or provide the evidence that what you are delivering is trustworthy? I'm just going to skip through these slides due to the time constraints. But, you know, we see within the government setting lots of examples of narrow AI being used, from justice to taxation to benefits. But within the generative AI space, this becomes really exciting because of the mass of data we have available within the public sector. And, you know, this is one example in the private sector whereby generative AI has been used within a particular domain. And, you know, I think that there's great opportunity to use sovereign models, sovereign in the context of domain-specific models in the public sector. And that's something that we're looking or starting to explore in different departments in the UK government. So, coming back to some of the risks that are exhibited through AI, we understand the risks in terms of financial risks, in terms of environmental, psychological risks, the damage that can be done through misinformation, through generative technologies as well. So, I think we really need to really get a handle on how we can manage these risks. And the way we do that is through prescribing, So I think we need to go back to the fundamental question of trustworthiness. So, as human beings, we understand how we build trust between each other. I mean, it may be regarding showing kindness, empowering our fellow human beings to do what they'd like to do. But as an AI system, how do we demonstrate trustworthiness within that context? And the way we do that at Validate AI is we propose 6 key principles, and these indeed do align to what's proposed at DCIT as well. So how do you scope projects effectively? How do you ensure the data is in a fit state prior to developing the AI? And how do you deploy these systems in a robust, safe manner? And within cross-cutting across all these different segments is the ethics and the legal requirements that we adhere to. And this slide basically represents some of the activities I've been doing within the government sector to develop more elaborate systems of checking and the work I've done in government really is inspired by some of the work done in the healthcare setting. There's a famous professor, Atul Gawande, who demonstrated the use of checklists within the operating theatre environment. And he tells a story whereby surgeons were very resistant of adopting simple, rudimentary checklists. However, the pilot that was done in the early 2000s demonstrated by using the humble checklist, they were able to reduce mortality rates by 47%. So, you can't underestimate the power of the checklist within the context of AI as well. And, I'm not going to go through that particular slide, but just moving on to the generative AI context, there's lots of guidance within this documentation, which is really useful as a public servant. And, importantly, what the guidance suggests is we're not in a place yet to use generative AI to make decisions around life decisions or decisions that can affect the outcomes of individuals. Another aspect of this guidance talks about ensuring relevant expertise to validate what's coming out of these generative AI systems. And lastly, ensuring that there's appropriate structures in place within your organization or within your government department to mitigate the potential risks of the generative AI not delivering as we would like it to deliver. And the list goes on. I'm just conscious of time. The benefits in the generative AI in the public setting are immense, and they do center around efficiencies in how we deliver services to the public. We're reducing time in terms of delivering services. We're providing more specialist advice that can reduce the time that's taken to deliver services by civil servants. But with the use of generative AI comes a whole host of dangers as we've heard earlier around hallucination, dangers in terms of you're not getting that personal perspective, there's some question marks around the ethics of the outputs that are coming out through these systems, and the guidance also suggests particular circumstances where you should not use generative AI. And importantly, something that differs in comparison to narrow AI is how do you actually measure effectiveness of the AI, the generative AI. And firstly, you need to understand what are the undesirable outputs that we've talked quite extensively in previous presentations and indeed within this presentation. But importantly, how do you measure poor performance? You know, what are those particular metrics? And the jury's still out in that context as well. And I think lastly, what we need to think about is, you know, when we're looking at the outputs, when we're measuring the effectiveness, you know, are those outputs actually fit for purpose? And secondly, if they're not, do they reduce the amount of time that it takes to deliver particular tasks? And if it does it, with human intervention, get you to where you want to be eventually? So it may be that, although the generative AI doesn't give you the gold standard, it gets you 70% there, whereby the public servant can go in and finish off the job. So, you know, as I say, that there's immense opportunity there. And I think as part of this roadshow, what we'd really like to do at Imperial College is to explore the benefits of generative AI in the government space and the development of sovereign models or domain-specific models in the public, you know, in the government space. So that's one of the deep dives that we'd like to do as part of this roadshow program. And that's where I finish. Thank you.